Hello, so today I'm looking at curriculum and culture, how the two things work together. And a lot of the work is drawn from Athena versus the Machine, a book I bought out last year, thanks to Crown House Publishing. And let's have a look, making meaning in the world, how that might work and what it might mean. Now, the Athena curriculum, I suppose, can be summed up in the following ways about the idea of conversation rather than a one-way teaching of something. It's more of a conversation, but conversation works as an analogy for more than just a teaching method, perhaps. So it's curriculum structure and how the conversation might be put together to communicate culturally and to communicate culture, in fact. So the way we do things here, and who are you calling we, but all summed up in the word experience, perhaps. And then how do we develop taste? How do we develop opinions and values? And how do we find meaning in things? The ideas perhaps around truth, beauty, care, relationship to things and others, knowledge. And then perspectives, the difference between more subjective and more objective views on things. Dialectic argument and the idea of judgment. So all encapsulated in the idea that a curriculum should be about the pursuit of wisdom. I'm not saying we ever get there, but the pursuit at least gives us a direction. And the three things together: knowledge, knowing stuff, experience, what we bring to it, and our experience whilst we're involved, I suppose, as well. And then judgment. What are our judgment calls? What do we think? Where do we draw the line between that, and why? So a curriculum that allows students to know stuff, experience stuff, and bring their experiences to bear, and make judgments about things. So I'm going to look at questions around the best that's been thought, said and done, this sort of Arnoldian idea, but also looking at that because of, in England, the work of Ofsted and the national curriculum. Then I'm looking at how to teach culture and the particular challenges that might arise depending on how we interpret what culture is. And then an input-output idea, and how perhaps not all subjects are the same. And one way of looking at that is through subjects that are more input-output oriented than perhaps others. Then the relationship between culture and meaning, and then looking at the subjective as opposed to the objective and how we actually work with the subjective. And then finally looking at the development of judgment, dialectic, intelligent interleaving, which is another way of looking at it. Okay, here we go. So Ofsted in England, an inspection body who have decided that it's important that pupils have the knowledge and cultural capital to succeed in life. And what they mean by cultural capital is the essential knowledge that children need to be educated citizens, whatever that might be. And what that might be to them is found in the aims of the national curriculum. And the national curriculum says the following: it provides pupils with an introduction to the essential knowledge they need to be educated citizens, and introduces pupils to the best that has been thought and said. So there we go, the best, and the importance of the best. Now, Sir Daniel Moynihan, who's chief executive of the Harris Federation of Academies, called the Ofsted guidelines a middle-class framework for middle-class kids. So is that what we mean when we look at the idea of the best? Strangely, the best is what's best for the middle class, or what the middle class already like. So is Is middle class knowledge the best? Is that the best house? Is that a middle class house for a start? But let's say it is out there in leafy, it's got a tree in front of it, so it must be leafy. In leafy suburbia, is middle class knowledge the best? Can we all become posh? Is the idea. And there's someone who is quite literally posh. So is this middle class knowledge? I don't know. You have to ask a middle class person, perhaps. And middle class people, do they know who these three pictures are of? And is this the sort of thing that should be taught in our curriculum? So music, literature, and art for a start. Question marks over some of those subjects for some people, perhaps Sir Daniel Moynihan, for example. But also we have the Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci, we have Beethoven, we have Shakespeare. Now, if your pupils know about those three people and know about them in depth, have they got an education that enables them to become educated citizens? Are they, better off than they would have been not knowing about them? Well, perhaps so. So if we have these three elements of culture to teach, how do we go about teaching it? How do we go about teaching those three people and about their work? Well, in an input-output system, perhaps we can do it reasonably well. I don't know. Let's have a look. So my first question is where is the mind? And when I ask this question, usually people point to there. It's in there. So where you think it is and how you think it works is very important to this whole thing about how you approach teaching. So some people call this brain-based learning. I think I've got a book here that actually talks about how we learn the new science of education and the brain, for instance. So brain-based learning, and this is the idea that you teach knowledge and it goes in, and the important thing is to get it into the long-term memory, and using various instruction methods and measuring it using data to measure the outcomes, we can ensure that people know their stuff. But it's potentially reductive, and I want to explore how that can be potentially reductive, especially when we're talking about certain subjects, because I think at the basis of all subjects, this has a lot of potential. It's a very important part of teaching and learning, but it's not everything. And if it's reduced to this, teaching and learning can become far too reductive, in that perhaps we think of human beings as computers made of meat, as Mary Midgley put it. Richard Dawkins thinks of us, in fact, as robot survival machines. So, it's not an analogy too far away from various people's idea of what a human being is, for that matter. We are robot survival machines, and computers are by far the best metaphor for lots of things. So if we have the idea that the brain is a computer and we're going to put our best into there, then off we go. Let's use this. And this is from Daniel Willingham's wonderful book, adapted from that. Now, let's have a look here. We have environment, working memory, long-term memory, remembering and learning, and various things that go on to move things. Can't get too much into the working memory at once, and you try and do various things, mainly like quizzing and all the other techniques you're going to do, cognitive science techniques you're going to do to move something from learning it into the long-term memory, remembering it. And and then you measure it, see if it's there, and use various methods to measure it, and see how successfully it's been absorbed and remembered. And then in the end, of course, it becomes a test, a GCSE or something like that, and how you've done well, and have you remembered the stuff that we've taught you. It's all very well. It's good stuff. Now, here we have a teacher, therefore. It's going to teach something to child, and child is going to remember and say what it is, or write down what it is, or whatever. So the input goes in, there's the working memory, and it goes into long-term memory. We want to get into long-term memory. We're going to use quizzing. We're going to perhaps teach with certain gaps between things. We're going to interleave. Even we might do all sorts of things, spaced practice, retrieval, and all these things that go on. So input, working memory, long-term memory, output, and we're going to measure that output and the success of it by the grades you get. And then you get a good grade, you've got social mobility going on, you're going to do very well. So we've got this nice little picture going on here about why we should do it, and accountability measures come in, and accountability measures perhaps Ofsted itself, perhaps internal accountability in the school, perhaps through the multi-academy trust. Various accountability measures want to know that this is working, and in order to cover yourself as a teacher, of course, you've got to keep making sure you're collecting data as you go and saying, well, no, we've got a problem here and that. So you want to make sure the accountability measures you're using are going to work all the way through. So you've got your middle class, as Dan Moynihan calls it, middle class knowledge. You put it in a knowledge organizer, which perhaps it's cultural capital, whichever you like to call it. There it is. And you're going to put it into the chart. You get it through the input into the working memory, not too much time, just little bits, and chunk it down. And you can do various testing and things like that. Get it into the long-term memory, and the output and the social mobility is going to come from there. Cognitive science, you're going to do various things to make sure it goes working memory to long-term memory. You're going to use various techniques which cover that, make sure it gets there, and your own internal things. You've got target grades going on in the school. We've got data, and if the data, hang on, there's a child here, she's having problems, call in an intervention, going to intervene, and we're going to intervene. What do we do with her intervene? Well, we're going to keep her behind and give her more input, a bit more middle class knowledge going in there, a bit more cultural capital going into working memory. Not to overload it, but just to make sure she's got it. Perhaps we can just give her extra support, one-to-one tuition, or 1-to-2 tuition, or whatever. It might be a detention, it might be a punishment because she's lazy. All those things going there, the data, the interventions, and then, oh God, she's getting stressed by it all. I mean, she's staying behind, but she's getting very stressed. So we've got to teach her not to be stressed. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to bring in growth mindset. You can do it. You can do it. You can be really good at this. And a bit of, you need more grit. That's what you need. You need more grit. You need to be resilient. So we're going to put you on resilience training. So we'll keep you behind to get more input and output and all those things over there with the target and the interventions and all that sort of thing. But we also need to intervene on her grit. So we'll keep it behind on Wednesday. Wednesday's grit day. Then you can talk to our teacher, our head of grit, our head of resilience, our head of growth mindset, because we're a growth mindset school. And basically you get all this going on, and then Ofsted come along and perhaps we say, oh no, we've got I know, intent, that's our middle class knowledge, and our cultural capital, that's our intent. Implementation, that's cognitive science, that's our input, and our output in long-term memory, working memory, long-term memory, and all you go to interventions and target grades and all that. And the impact, well, look at the grades. How it's not just grades, of course, it's quality. Look at the choir, all that, and they're doing very well. Kind of a choir at the moment because we're in COVID land, of course. But there you go, we've got all those things together, and it's a beautiful picture. Here we go. So the cultural capital has got to be the best stuff. So we're going to teach it. I'm going to teach it in a way it goes into the long-term memory. Here it goes. Bang. And there it is. Output, grade, social mobility. And it is treating it like a machine. Robot survival machine. Here you go. And why not? It seems to be working. So we want it to work, and we wanted to make sure it works. And that's the way we do it. Now, one school came up on Twitter. A member of their staff has put this up. I like the fact that the learning walks, the governors are on learning walks to make sure. I mean, are you in the 10 minutes low stakes quiz phase? Are you in the instructional phase? Are you in the application of instructions phase? we're in a plenary phase. Well, it should be, this time they should be doing that because look, it's timed, it's cognitive science, it's science, so it must be good. And it works and it works, and we'll get higher grades because we're following the science on these things. And I'm not sure truly that science would actually, the science, you remember following the science is a way of getting away with lots of things. I don't think scientists would necessarily agree that that's the best way to do all your teaching and learning, by the way. And this is the problem. It's taking something which is a model, and models are of themselves, not a complete picture. They're not even true, really. I mean, it's just it's not really like that. But it's a good way of trying to represent what might be going on. And with some evidence that it works to a certain level in certain subjects at certain times, and no reason why not. But to make everything the same. So if you're teaching culture in that way, what happens? Well, this is Robert Bjork, who talks about memory and learning. He's very into desirable difficulties, interleaving, spaced practice, all this sort of stuff. And him and his wife Elizabeth work together for years on how to pull things together in memory. And I did a talk, and he was there, and I was talking about memory and the arts, and about his work and the arts. And he came up to me afterwards, and he said, he said it in an American accent, which I'm not going to do. He said the very interesting thing for him is, because he's a maths graduate and then a psychology nut, if you like. He said the interesting thing for him is that the majority of their work, and for most cognitive scientists and for most people involved in learning sciences, if you want to call it, most of their evidence is drawn from the research they do with mainly undergraduates, but not entirely, and undergraduates in maths and science. So these are the students nearest to them. So because they're working in science and psychology, they get psychology students, science students in, and associated students in the maths faculties and everything else. So they're doing most of their measuring in subjects which perhaps are the most arguably unlike some of the arts subjects. And he was saying, well, this is an important thing. It's an important point, because the work they're doing isn't necessarily completely valuable to someone who's teaching the arts in every way. But I want to go further into this. So the question is, should we be more hedgehog or fox? So we have the hedgehog and the foxy, Isaiah Berlin. Now, there exists, this is drawn from Aesop's fable, of course. There exists a great chasm between those on one side who relate everything to a single vision. So this is the way the school is going to work, and we're going to do that 20-minute, we're going to do a learning walk, and we're going to do 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, and we have a single vision. Everything's going to be done like this. And if you say, no, but it shouldn't be, they get very spiky and defensive and say, yes, it is, go away, go away. Or foxy, more foxy. On the other, those who pursue many ends, often unrelated and even contradictory, connected, if at all, only in some de facto way. Now, the thing is, schools don't like that. A lot of schools don't like the anarchy that perhaps comes from the hang on, you're the drama department, you'll do things totally differently anyway. And they try and get to be more hedgehog than fox. And well, I'm suggesting perhaps in some places you can be a bit hedgehoggy, other ways you need to be a bit more foxy. And it's trying to get some sort of balance with that. But because subjects are different, because they have different ways of engaging with the world, then I think you have to be more foxy when it comes to various things like whole school policies, for marking, for assessment, for curriculum matters, all those things. And the more you try and move things towards this is the way teaching should be delivered, every class should be like this, the less you serve the subjects and the less you serve the pupils, really, because they're not getting the full range of cultural experiences. And if we look at culture in a wide sense, which I'll come to in a bit, then you'll understand perhaps why I think that's important. Now, okay, so the best. This is Matthew Arnold there with his great sideburns. Culture is the endeavour to know the best and to make this knowledge prevail for the good of all humankind. So not only is the best important here, but it's going to prevail for the good of all humankind. So basically, if we look at someone who's had a great education, shall we say, of culture, they should be, out there doing good for all human. Well, Prince Andrew probably had he did. He had a very, top public school up there in the Highlands of Scotland. Is what he's doing for the good of all humankind? Not necessarily. So I don't know if culture, we can actually say that the best is going to make us into better human beings. But the other thing that we have is the opposite view. So instead of we become great human beings, we have an almost cynical view about teaching and learning, perhaps. So rather than just worrying about if it's going to make us great human beings, what we're worried about more is the utility of it. Does it get us through the test? And Michael Rosen talks about this, I think it was Key Stage 2 test, it's a reading test, Key Stage 2 reading test. And he suggested that doing the Key Stage 2 reading test, the kids had to answer questions on poetry appreciation. And what he was noticing was they were answering questions without appreciating the poetry. In other words, what's the words you're going to use to show you've appreciated this poem? Well, I'm going to say it does this is how it works, and this is why I like it, because it does this, and this. So in other words, they're not learning how to appreciate poetry, they're learning about the right thing to say in order to get a grade. And that measurement idea, that fitting into some sort of way of seeing the world, is not appreciating poetry. It's not about getting involved culturally. So on one hand, you're imbued by the best, you're going to become a better person. On the other hand, well, we just tell them what the best is, and then they're going to write it in a test, and then they've had the best, they've had the test, they've ticked it off, we can get and move on. And both that, the sort of utopian view and utilitarian view, I think are rather misguided. And another way of looking at it is the best. And that's the idea of the self-perfection, the utopian idea. So the educated Philistine, perhaps we're trying to bring about a whole generation of educated Philistines. So quite unaware, perhaps in that poetry test they were doing, that this is actually telling you things about life and all that this poem is giving you something that might be of interest in an important way for some point in your life. Rather than that, you can be completely unaware of those things, that you think it's just, it's going to make me better, I'm going to get a good test result, I'm going to get a good GCSE and get a good job out of it. And there's this sort of therefore, which Hannah Arendt here is calling a crisis in culture, that we've actually moved culture into a sense of something it's almost, I don't know, to say, look at me, here I am dressed in my cultural robes, my borrowed robes, in fact. And it's a bit like this. It's a bit like if you go to the theatre, if you could, but let's say you can go to the theatre, where's the best seats to sit? Well, they're probably in the stalls, row J, in the centre, or in the Royal Circle, probably let's call it the Royal Circle, in the centre, in the first or second row. And that's. But where did these cultural snobs go? Not the ones who want to get really involved with the play, they just wanted to be seen there, and they put themselves in the boxes there. We can see right in front of us there, the 4 boxes, well, 5, 6 boxes, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 boxes. There's some little ones there as well. So there's lots of boxes there. This is a West End theatre, I think, in London. You can put yourself in that box, and rather than being in a good place to see the play, you're in a good place to be seen. In other words, I'm not getting really involved in the culture on the stage. What's happening here is the culture is about me being seen to be cultured by going to the theatre. So the theatre is just sort of a cachet. This is cultural capital at its worst. Here I am, culture, I am cultured. But you're not getting cultured, are you? You're saying, look at me, here I am. And that's a bit like, oh, I can write the right answer for that test, but I've got no idea about the poem. I've got no idea about the play. I'm just being seen to be cultured. So for Arendt, this is where culture has a snob value. It's become a matter of status to be educated enough to appreciate culture. You don't actually get involved in the culture. You're educated enough. I've got a status, you see, because I can go to a play. I know what it's all about. Look at me at the play and all those sorts of things. So there's the best. We can tinker with it. We can do those little things there. Get involved in by teaching it input, output. It's there. We ticked the box, culture box, for my poetry appreciation. I've been to a drama play. I've said I've seen it. All those sorts of things. There was someone saying, I wish I could remember who it was talking about this, but talking about Russell Group university interviews, and saying that it's almost that people are just getting drilled in the things to say about things they've seen. So that, you know, I've done this, I've done that, and they put it down in their letters of application. And in interviews they might talk about it, but they're saying the right thing. They don't even go. It's sort of a sort of Sparks Notes approach to culture. They don't even go, but they know the right things to say. Oh yeah, I've been to Wimbledon. Perhaps that's a nice bit. I've been to the theatre, went to the opera. Royal Opera House, my favourite. Puccini, La Boheme. I think La Boheme's better than Tosca because blah blah blah. Never been. Just lying about it. And the whole system seemed geared around this strange thing, right from key stage 2 sats. You don't have to appreciate the poem, you just pretend you appreciate it by putting in the right word. Well, this whole thing is the wonderful Mary Midgley. The machine imagery has been so useful that people no longer think of it as a metaphor, but as a scientific fact. That here we go, we are actually input output machines, and that's all we need, and you know, it does have its place. But if that's it, then culture is something that is completely not absorbing, non-involving, then makes you wonder what's the point. And no wonder Sir Daniel Moynihan then perhaps thinks, well, look, the most important subjects are maths and science and English. Well, I think it's English and maths he thinks most important, and the others, who needs these certain other subjects, perhaps, especially at times when a full curriculum can't be taught for whatever reason. So, well, what am I saying? How do you teach culture? Well, culture and meaning is important. Those two things have an absorption about them. Meaning matters and culture matters, and we are absorbed by these things. And this comes into where is the mind. So if we think the mind is in this skull, completely in there and nowhere else, then perhaps it's inevitable that the input-output model is the one we use. But I'm suggesting there's something else here. Now, Heidegger always has a health warning. Yes, he was a Nazi. So, and I don't think he even repented for his involvement. So, dodgy geezer, let's say that. But Simon Critchley talking about him. For Heidegger, the world is part of who I am. Now, that means we're slightly saying not everything's in here is about you. You are involved in the world around you, and the world around you is involved in you. So we're, instead of the hard skull, we're softening that, making more semi-permeable membrane, perhaps, that things go in and out. And therefore, again for Heidegger, Critchley talking about it, human being is being in the world. And so I am not an ego facing a world of objects. So you're not there looking at the Beethoven, looking at that poem you're going to appreciate and all those things, saying, right, I am divorced from this. Rather, these things are part and parcel of your being, part of your existence. Now, if we start saying that, well, of course, you know, a poem could have absolutely nothing to do with you, and you just do it to get through the test and all that. But then there's another poem that actually means a lot to you. And when you perhaps have a funeral or something like that, you or someone you know is you're in love, you know, whatever it happens to be, this poem comes to mind, and it speaks to you in certain ways. So there is a relationship between you with the work of art and another person that all comes together, and it's part and parcel of the way you see the world and the way the world perhaps sees you, and that person who you're in love with sees you, or the people you read your poem out to at a funeral. All those people say, oh, that was such a beautiful choice of poem, why did you choose that, and all those things. All these things come together, rather than I'm just saying the right thing at a certain given moment. Now this sort of goes into more like Edward B. Tyler's sort of idea of culture. Now he had a different view than Arnold, and Arnold's view of the best that's been thought and said, well, Edward B. Tyler, writing around the same time as Arnold, and he looks at other cultures mainly rather than our own culture. So it's his beginning of more like anthropology, by the way. So there's all sorts of questions around that. But this particular quote is quite helpful. Culture is a complex whole, including knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, customs, and any other capabilities and habits. Culture is the way we are in the world. So all these things that go on around us, our knowledge, our belief, everything, our habits, that's culture. So culture isn't high culture. It isn't the world of arts. Culture is the way we negotiate the world, the way we find meaning. It's our way of finding meaning in the world. Now, Professor Andy Clark, who's a philosopher of mind at Edinburgh University, I think it is, and he came to a lot of this work through working with robotics, funnily enough, but it's very interesting stuff. But here we go. He's saying the scientific study of mind. Now, there we go. Is it brain-based? No, it's an interdisciplinary effort. It involves brain as part of body. So it's an interdisciplinary effort incorporating bodily, cultural, and environmental scaffolding. The whole thing comes together. So the mind isn't in there. And I'm sorry I've used this picture had cogs on it as well, so it's not exactly helpful to what I'm saying to keep the cog metaphor going, but it gives an idea between we're connected through environment, through social interactions, through the way we are culturally and the way we see each other and all those things and the way they see us. All those things come together and frame our mind. Our mind is beyond our brain and is out there in the world. It's enworlded, if you like. So culture and meaning is included in the mind, as is brain, as is body, as is environment. But culture, meaning is an essential part of the way we think. We think our mind is out there as well as in there, okay? So this brings the human back in. Rather than the input-output machine, we have a more subjective view here. Now, I'll go into explain this a bit more, but this is bringing the human back in. Now, for David Chalmers, who came up with the idea of consciousness, being a hard problem, or part of consciousness being a hard problem. And the hard problem of consciousness is the problem of experience. Human beings have subjective experience. There is something it is like to be them. So rather than just input, long-term memory, output, something else is going on there. And that is our subjective selves. Now for Tallis, he worked on brains actually quite a lot. I think he, as a surgeon, a clinical scientist, anyway, physician. But he's now a philosopher of mind, as amongst various other things. But he talks about it in this way. We can comprehend how the light comes in. So the input-output model, we can comprehend that. We can say something goes in, something goes in. But what the world of science so far is finding very difficult is to explain how the gaze looks out of us, how we look upon things, and therefore the subjective look towards the world. And some scientists just call it an illusion, for instance, but we'll go into this. So there we have our student in our lessons, and we're doing the romantics, the romantic art, romantic poetry, romantic music, whatever. And there they are, looking across the Gothic landscapes we've created for them. You know, there's the wind and the rain and whatever it happens to be going on in front of them. And there they are, totally absorbed by this wonderful world they're looking at. But unfortunately for me, quite often, instead of a student engaged like that, there was that staring back at me. That haunts me, I must say. Staring, there he is, staring. And how do I get him involved? Because no matter if it's just input, output, and perhaps, you know, I was going to go input, output there. I'm just saying, no, we've got to get you slightly more, your subjective views here going on. So subjectivity, the subjective look upon the world is intentionality, is the word philosophers have given to this, phenomenologists particularly, intentionality, which is an aboutness of things. Let's go back to my glass, actually, it's a good idea. So I look at my glass and I have a view on it. I have a view on it. And number one, this sort of strange blueness about it. It's got refreshing water in it. So the way I look towards it, it has an attitude. I have a feeling for it. I might just say it's just any old glass, but it might be a family heirloom, and it might be therefore have to be treated very carefully. It might mean a lot to me. The water has a taste to it. It's not too warm. It's not too cold either. So my subjective view of it is very important. So there's an aboutness that's going towards the thing itself. So for Tallis, again, this intentionality cannot be reduced to input-output, but it lies at the root of the knowledge relationship. So if I'm going to learn something about something, my attitude towards that thing I'm learning matters. Now, Kevin Mitchell, who's Professor of Genetics and Neuroscience, Trinity College, Dublin, when two people look at that object, so when you see this glass, you know, through this little box in the corner here, you've got a different attitude towards it than I have. And you're seeing it on a flat two-dimensional surface for a start. I'm seeing it in full 3D here. And perhaps is the blue the same, or you see green, for instance? I don't know. But it's the subjective experience that determines whether we learn from something and how it shapes our future behavior. So the subjective experience of it determines whether you're learning from it. So the way you see it matters. Well, there we go. So we're going to learn something. There is the subjective view, the light coming out of us towards something else. And therefore qualities matter. The qualities that we have, the way I see this is slightly different to the way you see this. And if we go back to the best, and if we're going to appreciate poetry, for instance, how do I know it's the best? We're going to have to not just say, well, that person says it's the best, therefore it is, because that's the way we're just all sitting at the theatre saying, oh, look at me, I am posh, I am at the theatre. We've got to get you involved in it. We've got to get you to say, why is that best? Why is that beautiful? Why is that good? And that involves a personal, subjective feeling for it. You're looking at it. And we have to teach how to look, how to think, how to feel about these things. So here we go. Which is the best cup of tea? Have a look. Decide. Now, you know full well that other people have a different view. Perhaps if there's two of you there, you can talk about it. Which one's best? Perhaps put me on pause for a bit. Which one's best of those cups of tea? Now, I can tell you that if you say D4, you're wrong, all right? Because that's just, as far as I can see, a cup of milk. A1, though, A1 without lemon, do you see that? Might be Earl Grey, and that might be very, well, perhaps lower upper class or upper middle class knowledge. I don't know. Sir Dan Moynihan might really appreciate that, but might not appreciate that, and he'll be into teaching everyone about builder's tea. Well, builder's tea is probably D1 with about 7 sugars in it, something like that. I don't know. Is that classist? Probably. Now, all those things. Which one's the best cup of tea is something you're going to have to taste, you're going to take in, and which ones over time, through experience, your judgment is going to change perhaps as well as your tastes change. But the educated palate, we're here to educate your palate towards appreciating a range of teas and what might be the best cup of tea. What's your cup of tea? What's your piece of toast? Now, science might take us and say, no, they're too charcoaled. They're carcinogenic. They're going to give you cancer over there. So for scientists, let's say someone's working in science here is saying, oh, basically you're up in the top corner there, right? A1, B1, bread, in other words. Other people looking at that saying, well, it's just sliced white bread. What about sourdough? Where's the sourdough? Where's the wholemeal? Where's the granary? All those things. So real middle class knowledge. Perhaps I'm sort of dumbing down here with sliced white bread. But some people say, if you go to a Premier Inn, you're going to put it around the toasting thing. It's going to spend its time going round. It's going to fall out. If you're in a queue behind this person who likes their toast more towards the charcoal end of things, you're going to be there a long time because they're going to put it round and round and round. But if you go to the Ritz Hotel, somewhere like that, and ask for toast, they give it to you. They don't expect you to queue up around one of those Premier Inn things that go round and round toasters. No, they'll bring you toast. And because it's the Ritz, you're going to say, yeah, that's the best toast. That's the way it should be. And you're going to keep very quiet about it, even if it's not the toast you like. But when you get home, you're going to have toast the way you like it, if your toaster's working. Perhaps it's seen better days. Got to put it in twice, or it doesn't clip down properly. I don't know. But in other words, you have a personal view towards something that matters to you. So knowledge, your idea of what's the best bit of toast, the best cup of tea, the best poem, the best piece of music, that knowledge comes to you imbued by your way of knowing it. Knowledge comes to you imbued by your way of knowing it. So intentionality, this aboutness, has a personal viewpoint. There is something completely subjective about your way of seeing that. Well, not completely subjective, because we have, and I'll read you what it says underneath. We have a sort of unity in our diversity, right? There's a capacity for a shared intentionality, which represents the ability of human individuals to come together interdependently to act as a single agent, maintaining our individuality throughout, but coordinating the process with new forms of cooperative communication. Now, Tomasello is talking about in Becoming Human. This is a very important point, in that I might like toast like that, you might like toast like that, but we come to sort of an agreement together about toast generally. So though we have our individual quirks and all those things, we do have this sort of shared intentionality, a shared aboutness of the world, where we have common values, perhaps common ways of seeing. We all like football, but we don't all like, well, we don't all like football, but let's say we're all football fans. We all agree to like football, but we don't all like the same team. And then we don't necessarily like the same players. We don't, but we have some sort of shared way of seeing. If you like music, you have sort of, this is good music, this is bad music, this is, and then we have that's the conversations coming in there. So we converse about things, and we perhaps change our minds, or we say, well, actually, you know what you're talking about. So when you tell me about these things, I'm here to learn from you because you have good taste, or you have bad taste, or you have weird views, or you're quite eccentric, aren't you? Whatever it is, we have that discussion, and through some sort of ways we come to say, well, there's our internal feelings about this, how we feel about these things, and then there's the discussion on the outside, there's our experience comes to bear, there's our knowledge comes to bear, and then we have an immediate sort of prejudicial view on something. Well, our prejudice comes to bear. But then we can also be educated to appreciate things in different ways. And that's perhaps, when we're talking about culture in the widest sense and in a singular sense, what education's about is developing those viewpoints. So Adichie talks about culture here. So culture functions ultimately to ensure the preservation and continuity of a people, which is a very conservative idea. It's conserving a way of being in the world. It's conserving this sort of way of seeing the world, and the habits that we have, the trying to keep these habits going, these values going, these morals going, this idea of beauty going. We're saying this is what makes us, and it is a very traditional conservative view. And when you sort of pull that together, then part of our job is to pass things on. Part of our job as teachers is to use curriculum to actually say, well, here's some good things. These are things which matter in the world, and this is why you should see them. In fact, for Adichie, in her family, she was the child who was most interested in this story, yeah, in this narrative, in the ancestral lands, in our tradition. So through the culture around her, don't forget that we're saying that culture is the whole, really interested in it. So there we go. We're interested, it's going on around us, very into culture in a big way. But she could not participate because Igbo culture privileges men. The paradox. The one who's most interested is not allowed to participate. Now, this is another way we talk about culture. This is the sort of cultural capital idea, or perhaps cultural literacy idea. In other words, this is all good for you, and it's all, these are the best things, these are the best that's been thought and said, and all this sort of thing, whether you like it or not. But it doesn't involve me. I don't care. This is the best stuff. So if culture's like that, then yes, you can be interested in it. But culture is not static. Culture is dynamic. So this is the other thing about it. If it is true that the full of humanity of women is not our culture, then we can and must make it our culture. And therefore, she wants to change the culture the very thing that preserves the continuity of a people, she wants to change. So in other words, the continuity of these people is going to change as time goes by. It's not set in stone. And that dynamic part of culture, this argument between the culture that's given to us, that we're born into, but our ability to see it, to look at it and say, yeah, it's great, but I want to change this, and this to make it more dynamic, to make it more true, to make it more beautiful, to make it more real, to make it more moral, to reflect my values, and also bearing in mind that those values that you have come from the culture as well. So this dynamic intercourse between the two, I don't know why I said that, between the two things, between yourself and the culture is very important. So Ravelli in The Order of Time. Science aspires to objectivity. So we're going back to that input-output model. We aspire to that. But the trouble with that point of view is we lose the point of view from which the pupil, in this case, does the observing. And every glance that we cast towards the world is made from a particular perspective. Now, I could be going horribly close to complete relativity here, where everything is relative, where everyone's point of view is exactly the same as everyone else's. But I'm not doing that. And I'll tell you why in a bit. But we'll start with Nietzsche and his wonderful moustache. For Nietzsche, it's not relativism, it's perspectivism. And this is sort of where I say it goes, right? So that there are perspectives, but the more eyes, different eyes, we know how to bring to bear on one and the same matter, that much more complete will our concept of this matter be, and our objectivity be, the more objective we can be. So it's not also, it's not just a number of eyes, it's the knowledge of those eyes, what they know, what their experiences are, what they bring to bear upon the conversations we're having. I am an art expert, so I can talk about art really well. My eyes are really helpful, but in a game of rugby, I don't know anything about it, so my eyes are less helpful, but still I've got something to say. But I'm going to listen more to the person whose eyes are more, whose perspective is more expert than mine, but not just one way of seeing, one way of being in the world. There are a number of things. So we're talking more fox than hedgehog, aren't we? And Noé talks about it. It's a mistake to think that our responses to works of art are only mere responses. They're more like judgments, thoughtful, shaped by knowledge, background, experience, and the larger culture, the ongoing dialogue. And Noé is another philosopher of mind. And there we go. So we've got knowledge, experience, judgment. These three things, which I'm saying are central to bringing culture and a good education in culture to the foreground. So how do we do that? How do we bring these ideas to bear in the classroom? Well, we want to develop judgment, develop not immediate responses. I hate that bit of toast. That's my, I like tea like that. I want all those things. We actually have to develop, because judgment is a thoughtful process, not a knee-jerk reaction. So we interleave work together and we put things together, and in narrative, we tell curriculum as a narrative, and we bring, if you think of, I don't know, each work as a character, we put characters together and get them to converse over time and in front of us, and that. Well, let's give some detail to that. So we have to teach what beautiful is, perhaps. So we say, this is beautiful. E.H. Shepard's drawing there is beautiful, and this is ugly, the Walt Disney thing. And the kids go, no, I like that more, because I like loud, garish colours and sort of things like that. And we say, no, that's ugly. That was beautiful. That's ugly. Okay. But this one, well, we're not so sure. And we can take them through. Well, this perhaps is a bit more beautiful on the. So we're trying to educate their palates. And you're saying, no, but even some of you watching this saying, no, but the Disney, because your relativists, well, you're not, you're actually Disney files. Disney own all those pictures, by the way, so I probably shouldn't use any of them. So watch out. But there, if you like the Disney cartoon version of Pooh and Piglet there, then when you go into an exhibition at some expensive gallery somewhere and are faced by this, you won't know what the hell to do. Jeff Koons' art is kitsch. Now, if you have that and think it's beautiful, you've got no idea what kitsch is. But if I teach you that's the sort of kitsch art, that it's not as soulful, as deep, as thoughtful, and beautiful as the shepherd drawing, then you can perhaps get into some sort of idea why that is kitsch, and you get the shock of the new, but a frisson to say, oh, right, so yeah, I get it. And look, I mean, look at that in the corner there, sort of caterpillar on steps. I mean, these sort of strange things. So you get an idea of what kitsch is. Well, what about this? Well, there's sort of the artist shit there, literally artist shit, and there is a urinal. You know, those two things there. Which is the best of those two? Which is the best? And that, by the way, the other thing is just dog shit. That's real dog shit from the pavement. Now, which one's best of this? I mean, how the hell could you get involved in this conversation at all if you don't know anything about art? Because it's all ugly, isn't it? You wouldn't want that on your wall, any of it. Or would you? Would you? Well, perhaps some people do have the artist shit on their mantelpiece there. Some people, well, I don't know if anyone does have the urinal there, but lots of people have the dog shit outside their front doors, or at least on the pavement, somewhere out there. And that's sort of, well, sort of the art of the city, perhaps we could call it. Now, the challenge faced by an artist, Noe again, is to make something new that is comprehensible. To be comprehensible, it must already be in a way partly old. So we're going back to Adichie's thing here, that we have the loving the tradition, loving and knowing the tradition. So this is where knowledge comes in. You've got to know stuff in order to appreciate things that move it on. So the avant-garde artist who pushes the boundaries, if they just completely ignore boundaries and just do something so outlandish that you've got no way into it at all, then you don't understand it. But you know that the shit and the urinal and all those things, found objects, that at least if you know that tradition, if you know that argument, you can get involved in it. So choosing a piece of work, well, what am I talking about in the terms? Well, look, this is Delacroix. If you look at Delacroix, the unmade bed. Now, if you know about that, then the Emin unmade bed is less of a shock. It's something that makes sense, and therefore you bring your knowledge to bear upon this. Whereas other people just see that and say, well, that looks like my bedroom this morning. That's not art. They don't understand it because they haven't got the knowledge to put it in, have they? How do we know it's any good? Well, we know it's perhaps good if we have that. If we don't have that, and if we just know that, we don't know it's good at all. We don't know it could be good. But with that, we can say, well, at least it has some connection. That's got a lot more skill, you might say, in it. That's, you know, I certainly made that this morning. That's how I got up this morning. That's you know, that's anyone can do that. But that's a bit more skill involved in that, perhaps. And you get involved in the argument. But the more you know, the more you can get involved in the discussion, the conversation, and these two pieces of work converse together. There's a conversation there. There's a juxtaposition. So if you're putting together unmade beds, you've got your unmade bed at home, you've got Emin's unmade bed, and you've got Delacroix's unmade bed. You put them together, and at least you have a conversation about what's good, what's not good, why it's there. So how do you know it's any good? Well, to an untrained eye, perhaps it just looks like it's real, because that looks like a real unmade bed. That looks like a real unmade bed. I like things that look real. And I like butterflies to look like butterflies. Well, here we go. So which is the best butterfly there? Well, this is Austin's butterfly, the famous drawings about teaching someone to improve their work to get to a point. Now, it's obvious which the teacher thinks is best, because the teacher has framed the best one and put the child's name on it. Whereas the child, well, started off with Austin 9302 and drawing, I think, his butterfly there. Now, the point is, we've got a sense of realism here. It looks real. It's trying to look more and more real. But for art's purposes, we're talking about culture, getting involved in it, and developing a palette, developing a sense of what's good and not so good. Perhaps I can give a slightly different view. And this is another thing with art. It's not just about things looking real. There's another sense to it. There's something beautiful about it. Now, number 3 isn't beautiful. I think that's not very good at all. Number 2, yeah. Number 5, far too complex and difficult. Look, my favourites are number 1 and number 4. I think they're the best pieces. Number 1, because that sort of naive sense of the child's immediate reaction to it, which from my point of view has a nice way into that sort of art. But actually, I think 4, where the teacher has taught, about appreciation, about looking at something there, but it's a fine line. It's not real. It's not trying to be realistic as such, into the point of the number 6. And it has a sense of fineness about it. And that fineness that we found in the shepherd earlier on, the Pooh and Piglet. Whereas number 6 here is moving, I don't know, perhaps it's colour I don't like. I don't know. But it's the real, look, another way of looking at it. Which of these is best? The one that looks most real? I mean, for the teacher of Austin's teacher probably thinks Picasso got worse as time went by. 15 years old, he was a pretty good artist. But look at him at 89. Bloody awful. Can't even draw something, make it look like it should look. Well, again, juxtaposing these things together, we get an idea of how to talk about it more, to get a sense of the artist and how the artist has moved over time, but also what they're trying to achieve over time. And perhaps we know more about the art by putting it together with other pieces of art. And this is the Athena way, if you like, is to say we need to talk and teach dialectically. We need, for a lot of subjects, not just the input-output, which has its place. The input-output has its place. It's an important part of teaching and learning. But if you just leave it at that, and some subjects, perhaps, that's fine. But if you're teaching poetry appreciation in an input-output way, you're not going to teach poetry appreciation at all. You're just going to get people to write something down to look as though they're appreciating poetry without understanding it at all. So instead of input-output, we've got to look at 2 things. The environment, culture, we're involved in it. Attention, it doesn't go one way in, we're actually looking out, of course. And I don't know why that attention arrow is in that direction, going in. I've never understood that. Look, attention going into working memory. But you're looking out, so you're aware and thinking, exactly. And therefore, that's a 2-way arrow. So instead of input, output, we've got attitude going on. I am looking at you, telling me these things, and you're looking at me whilst I'm telling you, you're telling me these things, and I'm having an attitude towards that knowledge before it gets to me and whilst it gets to me, and then as it grows and all those things. So the whole environment around me is what I'm part of. It's not a separate thing to me which I look upon. It's not an ego facing a world of objects. I am in the world. I'm a being in this world. I am cultured from day one. I am not just getting culture shown me. I am part of it all. So look, this is an extremely complex way of looking at it. Culture, and we know more than we can tell, don't forget. There's far more that we know is going on there, but we're born into this. Our knowledge, the things themselves matter to us, all those things, but these are important. The input does go in. We have perspectives on it. We have subjective personal knowledge about things. Yes, we're constrained by genes, where we're situated, our bodies, all these other things. But the important thing is that we have freedom in our pursuit of wisdom, that we have our own development, our own judgments, not judgments that are given to us, that the right things to put in the poetry test. So we bring to bear our experience, our subjective view, but we're getting the overview where all the subjective perspectives come together. We're looking at all these different perspectives, and from that there's the traditional view that's come back, and then there's the avant-garde view and the challenges to that we're getting involved in, because we're getting involved in the conversation and dialogue, and we have a freedom that's essential in education to take our own view on things, but that view has to be educated. Judgment is not immediate. We have to teach how to judge. We have to teach how to think about things, and that involves knowledge and experience coming together. Knowledge, experience, and judgment. So I ask in the book, what's the best? Well, we do not teach the best that has been thought and said. Rather, we teach pupils how to make up their own minds in an informed way in order to make an educated judgment about what the best might be. Now, this is important as well. So, Appia, I begrudge nobody the things I love. I can love what is best in anyone's traditions while sharing it gladly with others. So the best, as well, is not just the best. You're bringing the best in from all over the place, but there's your traditions, there's your background, there's the culture you've been born into, but there's best from other ways. Now, bearing in mind that some of these are not going to fit so well into your traditions and all that, but in order to bring those in, we have to teach how and where and why these things are considered the best. So you're literally, to develop taste, you need to develop your palate. But there is no way that we look at certain things and say that that shows that somehow that race who brought about these things are the greatest. Because that doesn't, for number one, he says here, if you do that, you understand neither race nor civilization. So here's Robert Bjork again, not so close up this time. If you have several things to learn, it's enhanced, performance is enhanced through interleaved practice. It's also better for the ability to transfer learning, and this is the thing that interests me particularly. Students able to discriminate better. They'll be able to say what the values and what's that's got and what that has got next to it. So juxtaposing one thing next to another allows for discrimination processes. It's good for inductive learning, better for inductive learning than simple temporal spacing. and you can notice commonalities and differences. Now, he gives the example of Monet and Picasso. How can you tell the difference between Monet and Picasso? Put them together and teach them side by side. That might be 3 weeks on one, 3 weeks on another, or something like that. But close together, you're more likely to see the differences, like we did earlier on with the different Picasso at different ages. I've also thrown in the Van Gogh there. You might have known that as soon as you saw it, Starry, Starry Night, or whatever. And you're saying, oh, well, look at the differences and look at the similarities there. Now, you could have a huge discussion about these things. What are the similarities? What are the differences? None of them look real. They have different things going on here. And we might, of course, over time, put together more realist pieces and more abstract pieces and put those together and find different things going on there. But you're going to know more about something by looking at what it is, as well as what it is not. And that way you learn more. And that's the argument. So not only do you learn more, but you also can then develop your taste. Well, look, from these three things, I'm more of a Van Gogh kind of guy. Perhaps that's what I'd say. Yeah, perhaps you're more of a Monet person. Don't know. But you develop taste. So you're coming in by saying, well, yeah, so my judgment is I'm going to be thoughtful about this because I'm putting these three things together. Now, when I first saw the Picasso, I rejected it out of hand and all that. But now I can see, and you're getting involved in the arguments about things and why some things are better than others. So this dialectic comes from intelligent, I'm calling it intelligent interleaving because it's not just throwing any old thing together. You're putting things next to each other that really matter. Now, another example Bjork gives about, he talks about the Monet and the Picasso, but he also talks about a benign and a cancerous cell together and looking at those things and learning what's the difference between the two. So rather than just learning one and moving on, sort of learn both together and you actually see, and therefore you learn more about both by having them together than you would learn having them separately or just only one ever looked at. So another thing with novels anyway, because the way they're written or whatever, over time, perhaps there is a conversation going on between the writers of. So one writer might be responding to the work of another. But if you just had Heart of Darkness on your syllabus, for instance, then you'd get pretty much one perspective of the world. But Things Fall Apart gives you a different perspective, both on Heart of Darkness, but also on a very important argument that's going on. And some people say you shouldn't teach Heart of Darkness at all. You should only teach Things Fall Apart. Well, again, I'd say, well, perhaps not. Perhaps you should have both taught there. And the context is important because putting them both together tells you a lot more than just teaching one or the other. Or neither, of course. Now, so if we go into the idea that we are made by the culture around us and also we make the culture around us, so the culture is human-made, and yet it also, we are born into it, so we don't come in completely independent of it, looking at it as something separate. We are born into the habits and ways of doing things. We go outside and walk on the pavement. We don't just ignore everything out there. The culture gives us lots of information about the way to be within it. Then the argument here that the British Empire provides the common ground upon which histories and identities were forged, whether you're a white Etonian or queer British Asian social worker, whatever it is. So there's, between a total denial of imperial history and mindless celebration of it comes knowledge of what happened. Now, I actually really like this quote. And I think I have lots of differences between myself and Miss Gopal, Dr. Gopal, about things. But the important point here is that we are part of together. And the perspectives bring about more of an objective view. So that Nietzsche quote comes in here, and Dr. Gopal is absolutely right to point that out. And she's also right, I think, to point it out that British literature is a great dissident tradition that acknowledges that there's a hell of a lot of great books out there from all perspectives that can be put together in some ways to look at things that matter. And so C.L.R. James, who I think is a wonderful writer, you can put colonialism next to the great and profound discoveries of Western civilization. In other words, it's not all great out there, but it's not all bad out there. And part of telling the truth about things is the different perspectives. So when I was a kid, I was taught Industrial Revolution, British Empire, generally as great things. That was it. Now, Wilberforce, I can't even remember. I think I did more about the seed drill and the steam engine. So the profound discoveries of Western civilization to me were very limited, but there was no conversation going on there, no juxtaposition of things that put them together. Put the British Empire right next to colonialism, and let's look at those two things together and see the commonalities and differences from different perspectives about things, and try and get a more objective view about things. And this argument became a big one. I think it was last summer at the time of making this vid. Should you have Mozart or Stormzy on your curriculum? And then, of course, some trendy schools put the Beatles in there to be down with the kids, rather than go to the extreme of Stormzy or the boringness of Mozart. Well, of course, I'm going to say you've got to put all three of them together. But there are different things, aren't there? Because you might be looking at melody, harmony, rhythm, and illustrating it in different ways. So you're not just looking at a Stormzy or a Mozart or a Beatles. You're putting the things together through different lenses, through different perspectives upon things. And that way you're developing taste, opinion, judgment. And the experience of your kids might be relevant, might not be relevant. Some of them might know Mozart, some of them might know Stormzy. A lot more probably know Stormzy, I don't know. But let's say they do. You don't just want to teach what they know, you also want to take them over to Mozart. So how do you get them to go through to Tracy Emin's Unmade Bed, which in this case would be Mozart? So you do have to start somewhere that they recognize something, but you also have to get them over to Mozart. I think you have to teach Mozart. You can also teach Stormzy, but you've also got to teach which one's best. And in the end, they're free to make up their own minds. So they might come back at you and say, Mozart's best, actually, even though you told me Stormzy was, or vice versa, more likely. But that doesn't matter as long as they understand what's good about Mozart, what's good about Stormzy, what's bad about Mozart, what's bad about Stormzy. And there might not be a bad about either of them. But they can articulate, understand the conversation because they feel they have a real palette for music in the whole. And that's a successful education, not just this is what you say about Mozart. Input, output, test result. No, you understand and feel and really get into why Mozart might be better than Stormzy, or Stormzy might be better than Mozart. And the Beatles, which was the best Beatle, you know. So the conversation is more important than the conclusion, really. But the conclusion shows if it's an educated judgment, which judgment we're saying is about thought, then obviously the education has been a better one than the mere input-output. And I'm not saying the input-output isn't important, remember. There's a very important part of education which is just about remembering stuff, but it's not just that. So I would teach, we had 4 practitioners we could teach. They're all dead white men. We had to teach one, and I originally taught one of these 3 and then moved on. This is theatre, okay? This is Bertolt Brecht, Konstantin Stanislavski, and Antonin Artaud. And teaching them all together over a period of, I think it was a term or so, in the same amount of time that I taught one, we began to teach 2 and then finally 3. Now, we teach them concurrently, so do a bit. I would teach Brecht to start with, and my colleague would teach Stanislavski, and then I would teach Brecht and Artaud, and my colleague would teach Stanislavski, and we'd do it practically and theoretically, with lots of writing, but lots of discussing and talking and practicing and doing all the things, input, output, stuff that you need to do to know the stuff about each of them. But the level of appreciation of the differences between them was very sophisticated in the end, because by putting one next to the other, you could learn more about both of them than you would have done if you just learnt one of them separately. Now, that was obvious. That was obvious, because you wouldn't learn anything about one of them. But what I'm trying to say is the singular, you'd learn more about the single one of them by having that person next to another one. So about staging, for instance, you know that Stanislavski felt the 4th wall was very important, that the audience was out there somewhere. And then you'd learn that Brecht broke down the 4th wall. So just those 2 things, by putting them together, you'd know more about the 4th wall, and you start to get an opinion about which you preferred, the 4th wall being there, or the 4th wall not being there, being smashed, being looked at, or even Artaud, who wouldn't even bother with stage. The stage would be completely different. He had 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, west, and an acting area in the middle. And the stage, there would be a stage as such. The acting would go on above you, below you, through you as an audience, and so we had different views. One was realist, one was anti-realist, and another was a feeling that would communicate through emotional ways, whereas Brecht and Stanislavski were more what we'd call the traditional ways, perhaps. I don't know. So you'd learn more about those 3 separately and because they were together, if you see what I mean. So 2 roads diverged in the wood. Mother Robert Frost. I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. If the child comes out disagreeing with you, that doesn't matter so much if they understand what they're talking about. The knowledge will come to them more clearly if it involves their experience and their experiences, and they are allowed to develop, not instant, but develop over time, judgment. And that becomes the conversational Athena curriculum, if you like, that we're not input, output. We know that you look out upon the world, that you see the world. Things don't just go in and your output is then measured and all that. We try and evolve and develop the way you see the world around you, and that you might want to make changes to that, or you might want to be more conservative about it and conserve what there is around us. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter as long as you understand exactly what you're doing and you have empathy for those who have different viewpoints. And therefore we have to listen to different viewpoints. Heart of darkness, would be taught there. Would be taught there. It shouldn't be ignored as a difficult text, and then things fall apart. It's taught next to it, alongside it. And those 2 things become part of the discussion. And the teacher's job is to steer, to say, go back to the Winnie the Pooh, that this is better than this and this is why, though other people think this is better than this and this is why. And if you allow this to be better than this, then this is why this happens next. And this whole narrative comes together through these dialectical discussions between this work and this work and this work and this work, and we build up. And so the hedgehog way of looking at every subject's the same. Well, if that's just input output, then it doesn't work for the arts, because the arts, more than anything, do have a personal judgment to be made and to be developed, and particularly when it comes to children and students, pupils who make their own work. So knowledge, experience, judgment equals the pursuit of wisdom. And so knowledge, input, output has an important part, but knowledge is also imbued by our way of knowing it, which brings our experience into play. And those two things together can jar or can make things very difficult. So what we also have to do is to say, well, let's look at all the perspectives around us and try and develop intentionality, that this shared intentionality, that we all have our viewpoints upon this. And somewhere along the line, we might come to why there are these standards over time, why, you know, the shared intentionality of tradition, of history, have made it get to this point. But we also have judgment within that. We have free will. So our consciousness comes to bear, but it has to be educated and thought about. And we have to reach our own judgments about why this poem is good or why this poem is not so good. And we have to be able to articulate that beautifully and eloquently and thoughtfully. And that way, we get closer to wisdom, but probably never wise. Unfortunately, we're flawed. We all have our hamartia after all. Anyone wants to contact me, there's some contact details and everything else. I hope this has been interesting and perhaps useful, but certainly be interested in any further conversation, perhaps in the notes below the video would be a good place to start. Thank you.